Lease payments are the payments made by the lessee to the lessor for the right to use the underlying asset. Determining what is included in the lease payment is critical because it impacts your lease classification as well as measurement of the lease liability and right of use asset recorded on your balance sheet. Hi, I'm Priya Singleton, Quality Control Officer at Blue & Company. Let's figure out what to include in your lease payments. Under ASC 842, the lease liability is equal to the present value of the remaining lease payments. To figure out the lease payments, first include the fixed payments that are in the contract for the right to use the underlying asset minus any lease incentives paid to the lessee. Fixed payments could also include in-substance fixed payments. A good example of this is if your company may lease a car and the contract may state that the fixed monthly payment is either $200 per month or 25 cents per mile with a minimum payment of $100 a month. In this case, you would include the $100 in your fixed payment because even though there appears to be variability in the payment, the $100 is the minimum cost and it's unavoidable. Next, include variable lease payments, but only if they depend on a rate or index, such as the Consumer Price Index. This variable lease payment is measured using the rate at lease commencement, meaning the spot rate at that time. Any payments you have to make based on the changes in that rate or index should not be included in the lease payments. This means you don't need to forecast the change in the index throughout the lease term. You would account for any additional payment resulting from the changes in the period in which they are incurred. In addition to the fixed payment and the variable payment, consider whether you're reasonably certain to exercise any purchase options in the lease. If you're reasonably certain you'll exercise the purchase option, then the lease payment should include the exercise price of that option. Lease payments will also include any penalties for terminating the lease if the lessee is reasonably certain they'll exercise the option to terminate the lease. Similarly, if there is a renewal fee to exercise a renewal option and the lessee is reasonably certain they will exercise that option to renew, the fees associated with this option would need to be included in the lease payment. In some situations, a lessee may guarantee to the lessor that the value of the underlying asset returned at the end of the lease will be at least a specified amount. So say an equipment lease you enter into where you guarantee that the equipment would be worth at least $5,000 at the end of the lease. In such situations, the amount probable of being owed is also included in the lease payments. Finally, sometimes if the items being leased are substantial, like an airplane, it might be held by a special purpose entity for tax purposes. You will also need to include within the lease payments any fees paid to the special purpose entity for structuring the transactions. Items that will be excluded from the lease payments include any variable lease payments not based on a rate or index, such as payments that vary based on volume of sales generated in a manufacturing lease, or a simple printer lease where a component of the payment is based on the number of pages printed. Lessee's guarantee of the lessor's debt is not considered in the lease payment. Amounts allocated to non-lease components are not included in the lease payment unless you have made the election to combine as a single lease component. Remember, when you do not elect the practical expedient to separate the lease and the non-lease components, the consideration in the lease contract would need to be allocated between these two components. So when non-lease components are present in your contract, the lease payment is only the portion of the consideration that is allocated to the lease component rather than the total consideration in the contract. For additional insights on this topic, please click on the link below and download Blue & Company's ASC 842 Lessee Implementation Guide.